welcome everyone. I'm just giving a minute for people to join. But my name is Justin Worland. I'm a senior correspondent at Time Magazine. I write about climate change and the intersection of politics, policy, and society, which really includes pretty much everything as it relates to climate. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel discussion with business leaders and representation from the Biden administration. This event is being hosted by Ceres, which is a sustainability nonprofit that works with investors and companies around the world, as well as the We Mean Business Coalition, which is a coalition of nonprofits that work with investors and business leaders on climate. Many of you have seen the letter that went out last week and it was updated this morning. I'm going to talk about it a bit later, but calling for a robust NDC from the Biden administration. This is really an exciting time for this conversation, given the emphasis here in Washington around climate and the leadership, the Climate Leaders Summit, which is happening tomorrow and on Friday. Just before we get into the discussion and I introduce our panelists, I want to make a couple notes. Today's session is being recorded. And we are not doing a live Q&A, but I'm sure many of you saw and many of you did submit questions upon registration. And so I'm going to try to sprinkle in some of those questions throughout the course of our conversation. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. Lisa Jackson is the Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives at Apple. Javier Quinones is the President and Chief Sustainability Officer at IKEA Retail US. Mads Nipper is the CEO and Group President at Ørsted. Barbara Humpton is the President and CEO at Siemens USA. And Jamie Gentoso is Global Head of Solution and Products Business Unit at Lafarge Holcim. And also we will be joined by US Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. Later in the conversation, she had prior arrangements, and so is only going to be joining us for part of the conversation, but thrilled to have her in this discussion as well. So ready to jump in. Today, We Mean Business and Ceres released an updated letter to the president, an open letter to President Biden, to which all of the companies on this call, represented on this call, are party to, calling for an ambitious NDC, 50% emissions reductions by 2030 from 2005 levels. More than 400 organizations with $4 trillion in revenue, 7 million US employees are a part of this letter. And we have yet to see a formal announcement from the administration, but if reports are to be believed, the administration is listening, not just to the business leaders here, but also to the broader call for this ambitious NDC. And so this really big question I want to raise to the panelists, which is, for businesses, why does this matter? How will an NDC change your operations? How will it catalyze your decarbonization efforts? What is the significance of this moment? And we'll go ahead and start with Lisa Jackson, and then hopefully we'll have a dynamic conversation.
Awesome. I think in order to catalyze business, we need governments to lead and set strong policies. That's just, what the science says. The science is clear. We need governments to be clear that this moment is about embracing science-based policies, to embrace carbon neutrality. I think business's job, of course, is to show what's possible in the business context. So much of what we've done at Apple, we're already carbon neutral for our corporate emissions. We've now made the pledge to be carbon neutral by 2030. So much of what we're doing is about showing what's possible and still having a successful business. So when I think of that interplay between NDCs, when I think about government setting targets, making it clear, it's like wind in our sails, really. Wind's a good source of clean energy, but it's wind for us businesses to be able to move forward with confidence that we'll continue to see an investment and an economy that's built around clean energy, built around science-based targets. That's why we love science-based targets. We've embraced the UNFCCC's race to zero. We believe that businesses have a huge role to play, and a lot of it is folding in behind governments and behind our international organizations to show what is possible.
If I can jump in and build on what Lisa said, is fully agree. And I think that having the politicians setting very ambitious NDCs and following up with short-term policy, that, for example, for energy companies like ourselves, very few people probably know the company I work for, Ørsted, but we're the world's largest offshore wind developer. And for European economies who started out by setting sort of high NDC targets and following up by giving certainty for business that this was going to be a sustained and long effort, that also means that the security behind the investments, the certainty behind putting investments in, accelerated and substantial transformation of the energy systems becomes very accelerated. And in our case, I mean, we've turned around from being one of the most fossil fuel intensive utilities in Europe to now having almost 90% of our energy generated from renewable energy. And that has been made possible in this wonderful interplay between ambitious politicians and then a business that is ready and has the courage to act on that. So that's just to build from a sectoral perspective on exactly what Lisa's saying.
Barbara or Jamie, I'd be curious to hear from both of you. You work in industries, your companies both have commitments to emissions reductions, but you work in industries that are historically pretty emissions intensive. What does an NDC target mean for your industry? Does this something that will really catalyze change?
Yeah, so I'll start and add for us. We are cement production is a very energy intensive, but also trade exposed industry. So for those that don't know LafargeHolcim, we are the world's largest cement producer. And we produce, as we produce cement, we produce CO2. And we fully recognize that we needed to make this commitment to net zero. But we can't do it on our own. So having policies in place are very important. With them in place, I think the United States has the opportunity to lead the world with clean tech and manufacturing. But with the wrong policies, I think the United States we could end up importing cement, we could have carbon leakage, and we could then lose manufacturing jobs. So, it's really important that we act now. A lot of us are talking about a 2050 target, but LafargeHolcim, we have also put in place near-term targets for 2030. So to me, that's what is really important, that we're talking very near-term, talking about making large reductions by 2030 in order to reach 2050 targets.
Yeah, so listening to all of my colleagues here, what's clear is that businesses have embraced this quest that we're on. Yeah. We've known for some time that we can and should tackle this problem, and we've been taking steps toward that. In fact, we at Siemens in 2015 made the pledge to be carbon neutral by 2030 and to be halfway there by 2020. And here we are. So we know that we are already well down the road with action. What's really cool about this moment is that investors are speaking. Investors are making it clear they want to put their money where our goals are. So we know that we've got the right kind of tailwinds in this sector. And having a government framework that gives us common goals that can be shared, a common terminology, allows us to effectively bring our technologies to bear. So whether it's, for instance, the EV100 pledge with the climate group, seeking more investment in electric vehicles, electrifying our own fleet of 10,000 vehicles at Siemens, or whether it's the Renewable Energy 100, making the commitment to bring renewable power into our buildings using microgrids, et cetera, or the EP, that really converting our power into renewable forms. Companies like ours are active all across the supply chain, really enabling these things that are going to be captured in the goals to be announced shortly.
If I can build on that, Justin, first of all, I think it's super good and gives lots of hope, right? That we are having this conversation and that we finally see leadership from the US in this area, right? I think it's great steps what we have seen with the infrastructure package proposed by Biden's administration, and it is a great step. But I also have another reflection, right? When the US decided to step away from the Paris Agreement, we in IKEA, and especially in the US, decided to stay in and to operate and act in the same way as if we were in. We kept our investments in forestry, in solar, in wind. And today we are already producing more energy than the one that we consume. I think the 2030 objectives, it is first an accelerator. And I think this is absolutely important because when we only look at 2050, it's in my way of seeing it, and I think on nature's way of seeing it, it's far too long. We have committed in 2025 to do all our deliveries through electric vehicles. And for that, we need accelerator as well from government and from policies and investment.
Well, the NDC obviously is a forward-looking target. It's a target. It's a number. I'm curious, if each of you had and I won't ask each of you every question, but I think this is an important one. If each of you had a more sort of specific request or hope from the federal government in the U.S. That's sort of beneath the NDC that would help catalyze your emissions reductions, I'd be curious to just hear, what is that? So maybe we'll just go in reverse order from before and start with Javier.
Thanks, Justin. I think the first one for me would be an acceleration in the movement towards renewable energy, and really build incentives, subsides, good practices, and most important, I think, inspire. And inspire people these days, it's one of our focus areas in IKEA, where we want to inspire people living in a more sustainable way. Because first is healthier, and second is good for us and the planet. Then I think when it comes to circular economy, is probably the second one. Looking at waste, life of products, recycling, there is so much to do still in the US, and when we see all the waste that still goes into landfill. And I think the third area where we will need some support is actually in the food, and reduce the climate impact of food through sustainable agriculture, again, waste and consumption, actually.
Yeah, okay. And so let me focus our attention for a moment on investment. I mean, this is one of the things that government can do very effectively, is make investments in those technologies, or I'll call them elements of infrastructure. And so we've been happy to see in the American Jobs Plan that focus on, for instance, the rollout of electric vehicle infrastructure. What we've seen in the past is consider something like the Sunshot Initiative. Lydia Sakarik, formerly at the Department of Energy, had worked with us at Siemens, and I got a deep look into the process that was used to actually bring a market to a tipping point. That's the power of government involvement and the investment that can launch new market segments.
Jamie?
Sure. So, for us, investment is clear, but investment is much more of a long-term play. In the end, we really need carbon capture in order to, at scale and economically, in order to fully decarbonize from the cement industry perspective. But there are some short-term things that can be done by the government. And the first one is a policy on buy clean. The government purchases, 40% of our cement goes into infrastructure, and the government is a big purchaser of that. So simply putting in buy clean and looking at low carbon cements and demanding the use in all of the infrastructure that's being put in place through the Build Back Better, we can be in a much better situation as an industry. We have these products, we've had them for some time, but we're in a very slow to move industry. Many engineers want to use the cements that they've used for a number of years, but the fact is we've been innovating for years and been pushing and trying to push lower carbon solutions into the marketplace, and they're very slow to adapt. So the government can help very quickly from that perspective. The other place, and it was mentioned earlier, is regarding landfills and such. You know, we have the ability to use fuels, alternative fuels, and also alternative raw materials. But we face a lot of barriers in doing this. To give you a quick example and really quite relatable, our plant in Whitehall, Pennsylvania, we had the desire, and locally there's a lot of pharmaceuticals there. And one of the products that became available to us was eggshells. Eggshells have a really high calcium value, something that we need in production. And currently we truck in from 150 miles away a high calcium stone, and these eggshells can replace that very quickly. It took us 2 years to permit the use of eggshells as a raw material for us. So we really need to break down those barriers. And, you know, once we got that permit, we're bringing in truckloads of waste that was going into landfills. So it's really breaking down those barriers and moving much quicker and making it much harder to landfill that can help us move forward.
Yeah, and if I can build on what my colleagues are saying, I fully agree with what Javier started out saying, that really for electrification and the decarbonization to accelerate, we simply need a very high share of renewable energy. That is, I mean, we are incredibly pleased to see what the Biden administration has already announced, not just in terms of keeping pace on onshore, but also having a 30 gigawatt ambition by 2030 of offshore wind, leveraging some of the fantastic resources on the US coastline. And really, so far as again, the world's leading developer, we've seen that there's something as seemingly simple as a federal approval process or permitting process has been incredibly slow. That has thankfully already picked up a lot with the Biden administration, but continuing to ensure that those permitting processes are smooth, respecting obviously environmental concerns, which we should be very, very respectful about and engage in, but also to ensure that it's not a new process from every project, because each of these projects are easily 1,000 megawatts each, so they're big projects. But if that can become a more objective, data-driven process, that will speed out the road or the expansion of renewable energy, and it will make it a lot more it will be a lot easier for the developers to do that in time to reach those objectives. And then I'll just also mention that for the administration to help ensure that the federal ambitions are backed up and coordinated at state level. So when, for example, the tragic Arctic blast in Texas happened, that does not mean that there's going to be sort of ancillary service penalty on renewable energy, because that work exactly against the renewable energy rollout as well. So ensuring consistency between state level and federal ambition as well, together with the permitting processes, that would be where there would be great help for us to help really roll out as fast as we can.
And I'll just add to sum it up. I think everyone covered most of the things I was going to say, but you know, transmission is incredibly important to get the clean energy generation to the communities that right now don't have access to it. Speaking of communities, I think one of the things that the administration is doing that's so important is ensuring that all communities see prosperity in this moment, not just the business community, not just well-off and well-resourced and well-invested in communities. But if this really is to be an economic transformation, it has to feel good for communities that are hurting, especially those that have suffered coming out of this horrible pandemic. And that's the last thing I'll say. Well, actually, two more things. You know, we recently, last week, I tweeted about the importance of disclosure, about transparency in carbon emissions. We believe that the SEC should require that companies commit to being transparent and use audited carbon footprints, because I worry that there will be a lot of noise in the system from companies who will destroy credibility around climate change for all of us. So we have a bunch of leaders on this call, and that's great, but we don't want to see people come to believe that this is all just something that, because you can't see carbon emissions the way you can see smog or water pollution, that it goes away. And that's the last point I'll make. And it's kind of ancillary to climate, but I love the fact that this administration is focused on the things it will take to get women back into the workforce. This pandemic has been devastating. for women. And the reason that's important is because women make up a lot of the sustainability teams, should be also the sustainability leadership at many companies. And I want to continue to see that trend as well, because I think we bring a lot to the table there.
Well, I think there are a few points that are worth following up on in that, but I wanted to start with one that you mentioned sort of at the outset. You said, you mentioned at the outset of your remarks just now, and then I was going to refer to a recent piece you wrote in Time. I had to reference that because you had that piece last week in Time. You wrote that climate change and global inequity are far bigger problems than any one company can solve, but I'm inspired by how many are seeing that a healthy planet demands an equitable future. This has been a big theme in the sort of general zeitgeist and conversation. It's been a theme, in the Biden administration. What do you see as the role at a corporate level to infuse these sort of equity questions along with the climate questions?
It's a great question, because I think in the beginning, many of us think, oh, that's the role of government to think about environmental justice, community justice, climate justice. But we quickly learn that we have to be smart about the investments that we're recommending to our CFOs and to our chief executives, because those are part of the values of the company right along with climate. So you can't say, look, I'm a great company when it comes to climate, but I'm not a great company when it comes to the communities where we work or the communities where we sell. And so, I think it's a little harder to think of, but it just requires a stop and a think. So for instance, we have a racial equity and justice initiative at Apple. It was launched after the George Floyd killing last year. And obviously at the time we're in today, it's very mindful for all of us that one of the things we said is, can we accelerate Black and Brown owned businesses in the clean energy space? So we have an impact accelerator that is part of our environmental work, but meant to bring and ensure that Apple is seeing and helping to scale and maybe even participating in the marketplace by businesses that are new in the climate space, whether they be on the energy side or the recycling side, because we need to ensure that prosperity in our country is equally shared. And so I do think that businesses can ask themselves a lot about what their supply chain looks like, where they spend money, how they spend money, but also we all have to be really careful with the carbon removal projects we do, especially nature-based solutions. Are we looking at indigenous and local communities to ensure that when we're doing our work, it is also mindful of the communities where that work is happening? Or if we're paying for offsets, that we understand the entire picture around those projects. And it makes the job harder. It makes it feel a lot more complex. But I'm convinced that business can be part of this solution, as we are so many other social issues right now.
And if you allow it, Justin, I wholeheartedly agree with what Lisa said, because companies, we can all take action, both within the walls of our own companies, with our own employees, to ensure diversity and inclusion and equity. But I'll give another few examples on top of that and making demands for our supply chain. But our company, what some of the things we've done in the US, which is really important to ensure that the transformation happens in an equitable fashion. We made an agreement end of last year with the North American Building Trades Union, which is sort of a union with more than 3 million members, together to retrain the workforce to get jobs, meaningful and well-paying jobs within the renewable energy industry, and especially specifically within offshore. We also launched the Pro New Jersey Fund with a 15 million investment to promote that especially minority and women-owned businesses can actually get jobs in the offshore sector. So that because we cannot take for granted that the existing workforce can get from one sector to another. And for a sector to grow, and by the way, we need that workforce in a qualified workforce. We need to take a responsibility to help transform the capability structure of that workforce into getting new jobs, well-paying jobs, to the benefit of our own company, but also to the local community. So there's ample opportunity for all companies to take these kind of action, like Lisa just said, that Apple is doing as well.
Well, I want to ask a little bit about another point that Lisa raised, which is disclosure and credibility, and just to ask, what, and she mentioned also, the Apple's recent announcement regarding disclosure, and I wanted to invite anyone else to talk about this point. I mean, everyone on the call, and I did a little bit of research to confirm before saying that everyone on the call of these companies have made commitments and are perceived as leaders in the space. But how do you ensure that there isn't greenwashing or et cetera, that there's sort of a verification to make sure that your leadership, as recognized by others, is taken seriously? I also just want to pause to acknowledge that Secretary Granholm has joined the call. I'll let this question go, and then I'll introduce you into the conversation with some other thoughts, but also feel free to hop in. This question around disclosure, and I would welcome really anybody who wants to speak on it, but I can pick too.
I can go, Justin, if that helps. For us, it's extremely important, right? First, because as I said before, we are setting up goals that are first extremely aggressive, right, towards climate change. But then, of course, when you set up a goal, you need to be extremely clear and open on where you are. And I think this is so important for every single company, right? And I think this for everyone needs to be seen as a marathon and not really as a sprint, right? And no one needs to be ashamed of where we are, and as far as we take action and we start moving on the right direction. And I think for us, it is super important. We have, and connected to the previous topic, right, around equality and inclusion, we have seen how climate change is impacting the communities in a disproportionate way, right? For us, 3 years ago, we decided, or even before, to put climate and people together. And it's under our strategy called People and Planet. It's public. I mean, everyone can access in our web. And there you will see where we are, absolutely where we are every year, where we follow up the goals that we have set in a super ambitious way. And I can tell you, I take accountability as the president of IKEA US to make sure that what we commit, it happens, because it is, and at the end of the day, that goes down to, the value-driven company we are and why this is important to us.
So,
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, so from our side, it starts at the top with our commitment to net zero. And then it takes aligning the leaders' targets and their compensation to that net zero target. So, we've done that. And we also have bonds that are dependent on meeting these targets too. So, and then taking it down to the local level, one of the things that we've done in the United States is we are very big proponents of the use of environmental product declarations, or EPDs. So many industries on the building side tend to use industry-wide EPDs and not product-specific EPDs. So we have really been a great proponent and pushed toward the use of these. And what this means is, as you build an entire building, you have a true understanding of its carbon footprint, and then you can truly understand how it will impact the earth. So, from our side, we are very committed to showing exactly what the impact of our individual products and our individual clients have on the earth, and improving that over time.
And I mean, we at Ørsted, we also, we, like one of our fellow panelists said, we are a huge fan of the science-based targets as well, which we just encourage as many as possible to do, because this forces short-term action as well. And on top of that, we actually believe that it should be mandatory to report on climate risks and initiatives taken, because that will make the transparency to investors a lot greater. And it'll ensure that everybody who's engaging with the company can make informed decisions, because fully agree with the sentiment behind the question, that the risk of too much storytelling and therefore also greenwashing is imminent. And that means that the entire credibility behind the corporate efforts to decarbonize it can be undermined. So the more data-driven we can be, the more we can audit and sort of document that and make that mandatory, the better.
Yeah, and Justin, a final comment on this. Think about this. This has the same urgency that cybersecurity has. And what have we learned from our cyber approaches? Transparency matters, and sharing amongst the community the ways we are working to combat threats. We are in a moment where we need to be incredibly humble. Lisa, you've made this point that humility matters in this case because the science is continuing to unfold. So we at Siemens likewise are proponents of sharing, being transparent, holding our management accountable through measurement systems, assuring that what we're working on can be externally audited and validated, because it has that same sense of urgency. It's a matter of business continuity. We can apply some of the same rigor and discipline.
Right. Well, this is a great discussion. I may come back, especially on this question of mandatory disclosure, but I want to go to Secretary Granholm. I know we just have you for a bit, so I might ask a couple questions directed at her, but hopefully we'll still have a discussion, based on that. But just to start really big, I want to ask about, you think about the American Jobs Plan, you think about the NDC, which the administration will be announcing soon. What is the role for the private sector, in conceptualizing these plans? How does the private sector and the sort of business community that we're engaging with on this call help achieve those ends?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. And it's so great to be on with these great leaders. And, I just want to say, the private sector, y'all have been leading, even at moments when obviously the federal government was dragging its feet or non-existent in this conversation. So thank you for demonstrating that it can still be done, that we mean business, and that, y'all are leading the way. And it helps us to make the argument, by the way, for the American Jobs Plan or any other legislation that we want, where we want to push and have America lead, that we can point to what you guys are doing and say, look, at the private sector is already there. They see where the market is headed. They see this $23 trillion global opportunity and see it as a market opportunity. And so we've got to get in the game, which has been the argument that I have been making. So clearly, thank you for your leadership. But I'm hopeful that that the administration can work with you even more. And I really appreciate Ørsted's commitment on our 30 by 30 gigawatts of offshore. It's exciting to be able to enlist you and hopefully others to be able to not just install those wind turbines, but build them in the United States. And I appreciate the partnership with labor, so much going on. So the administration obviously is starting by doing more to couple federal support and incentives for the private sector with incentives and standards for both environmental equity and justice, which you guys were just talking about before, and labor standards for wages and the right to form and take care of the communities whose economies are interconnected with fossil fuels. So we want the hundreds of thousands of jobs we're creating to be good paying jobs for workers, open to union labor and to organizing. We want to make sure that we are creating communities that have the ability, where workers have the ability to stay there and raise their kids there and have a decent retirement there. We want to, especially do this and direct it to communities that have been left behind, whether they're fossil communities that are victimized by where the market is going, like coal communities, or whether they are communities that have been on the frontline communities, as we say, under smokestacks, or where kids have to use inhalers in school because they can't breathe and it's totally unhealthy. So we want to make sure that the benefits that we're creating flow to communities that have suffered from decades of disinvestment and neglect. And this is where I think a partnership with the private sector can be so powerful, because often it might not be the first place where business community might decide to go. Some of you have, and I'm not saying that, but there is opportunity, even greater opportunity, I'll just say, with this administration, we want to make it irresistible for you to locate some kind of expansion into communities that need it most. I mean, maybe there is, and I heard Joe Manchin say yesterday at an event, Senator Manchin, that he said that, you know, our coal workers, we can make the best damn wind turbine you'd ever see if you would just give them a chance. And so we want to make that choice for locating production and of course there's all sorts of work in maintenance and servicing, but I'm talking about production, manufacturing in the United States and in communities that have been left behind. And we want to support the effort to train people. We want to give incentives for that to happen. One of the biggest pieces of the agenda of the president is that it's designed to direct 40% of the overall benefits of the investments to communities that have been left behind. And so, you know, billions of dollars are going to be expended to build stuff in America. And if we can direct that build to communities that have been left behind, what a magnificent statement it will be about how public and private can work together. And I would say this, that, you know, a lot of in the American Jobs Plan, there's a lot of tax credits for obviously extending the wind and solar tax credits, but also transmission tax credits, battery tax credits have been added. You know, there's a big moment there for if we can get this passed, hopefully with your support, if you can say a word about this, tweet it out, whatever, so that both sides of the aisle understand that the business community supports the investments in America. So all I want to say is we want to work with you. We've got a loan programs office that I don't know if any of you have benefited from, but we're reinvigorating a new guy named Jigar Shah, many of you know, who does a lot of clean energy investment. He is retooling that office to make sure that we can help provide upfront capital to those who want to see expansion. I mean, Jamie, Lafarge, man, if we could get a facility, sequester carbon through cement in Appalachia, wow, that would be just awesome. You know, I mean, there's just so much. I mean, Siemens, I mean, of course, Lisa, Apple, holy gamoly. So I'm just saying, there is an opportunity here for us to really work together to uplift communities, and we want to be helpful. And we've got a lot of incentives to make it worth you looking at.
Well, if no one, I mean, I welcome anybody to jump in and continue the conversation, but I want to just ask about, I mean, you mentioned the DOE loan program, which of course has, some tremendous successes. Tesla it was catalyzed by funding from this program. It also has, the thing that some Republicans like to point to, the sort of Solyndra, things that didn't pay out. But I'm curious, how do you make the case for the need for the federal government to have this role with business when there are a lot of people who say, well, that shouldn't be the federal government's responsibility. So what is your sort of
great
pushback?
question. I mean, let me just say one thing about the Loan Programs Office. It has brought $2 billion back to the taxpayer. It has been by far successful. And as all of you who are in innovation know, sometimes something doesn't work out, but you learn from those failures to be able to achieve successes. And the Loan Programs Office has been enormously successful in terms of ROI for the taxpayer. However, this question is such a great question because it really goes to the heart of what is the role of government and business in a 21st century global economy. We know that our economic competitors are out there every single day intervening in the market to try to corner the market on name your product or name your supply chain. We saw this with China and solar. We've seen it with critical minerals. What a shame, for example, that I'll just use a personal example. In Michigan, we have this great company called Hemlock Semiconductor that was making polycrystalline silicon for solar panels and ingots. And they were big-footed by policy from another country that has decided to intervene in the market because they want to create jobs for their people. Well, hello, if we're just going to stand with our arms crossed and say, oh, that's fine, then we're going to watch all of this stuff. I mean, we've already lost. Our manufacturing sector is already down to a 72-year low because we have stood by the side of the road and watched this happen. So we've got to have a partnership. I'm not talking about state-owned enterprises. I'm talking about public-private partnerships that allow for businesses to be successful here, selling products and making them here. And if we continue just to bow to the altar of low cost, then we will continue to see this trickle out to other countries. I understand cost is an important thing, but we can be a partner in helping to reduce upfront costs, certainly capital costs, especially if people are willing to help build community and locate in places where we want to see as a nation people uplifted. So I think that smart government, public-private partnerships and intervention where it's necessary, particularly in areas where we know we have a national security issue. You know, why do we build no transformers for the electric grid in the United States at a point when everybody's worried about cybersecurity and we're importing from an economic adversary? That just doesn't make sense as a nation, not to mention our energy security and our economic security. So we need to be strategic, but we also need to be robust in partnering to make sure that businesses are successful when they choose to make things here and to sell things and service them, et cetera. I mean, servicing, obviously, you've got to be here for, but making stuff, we've lost so much of our manufacturing backbone, but we remember, and it's not like it's been that long. We've got people who just need to re-exercise those muscles, and we want to bring that back. And not all of it is going to come back, but specific key areas, particularly as it relates to energy or defense, we should be building here.
Secretary, if I may just thank you for that, because I can say as an international developer of renewable energy and the world's largest in offshore wind, I can say that, I mean, we come from Denmark, but we are really happy of the attitude of the United States, because we don't want to import stuff. I mean, we love to build stuff in the US. It shortens the lead times, it builds the capability. So when we work with our supply chain, as an example, when we work in New Jersey and we work with a German supplier to build a monopile facility in New Jersey, in Paulsboro, and we will work with suppliers to build nacelle factories for the wind, we love to have those manufacturing jobs. We think it's a good thing. So working with at both a federal level and at state level, together to build not only the jobs, the well-paying jobs, but also to ensure that we structurally build a capability that will help transform the entire workforce to be educated for the future and therefore be a potential workforce for us as well. It's a win-win situation. Yes, it takes effort. Short terms, it costs more money. But for somebody who's deeply invested in the market and a journey towards net zero, we don't have a choice. And as a developer, we will and we should lean in. So I just want to say that as a non-US native company, we are super appreciative of this approach.
Well, great. And before anybody else, we want to lead by example and offtake wind, energy from those who want to put them up. So we want to help purchase American-made products. And once you do that, then you create the market, right? The demand side here. And you can be the supply side, please. I love it. Thank you so much.
Secretary, you're absolutely right. And Mads, let me just build on this because Siemens is a supplier to you often.
We're happy about that.
So if you think about where we are, this is a period of intense disruption, transformation, and it requires systems thinking at a time like this. It requires a whole of business and a whole of government approach to envision that future we want. And let's just take the auto sector for a moment, right? The transition to electric vehicles is, yes, an auto OEM challenge. And we're right in the midst of that with everything from semiconductors to carbon neutral steel to all of the things that are going to go into a successful transformation. At the same time, though, we have to think about how to power those vehicles. And so the idea of getting the utilities engaged, getting renewable energy onto the grid, this is a brilliant moment for industry and government collaboration to envision that future, create a framework, structure investments into those areas that will drive us rapidly through that transformation.
1000%. 1000%.
Yeah, and speaking as, sorry.
Oh, please go
Rushing
ahead.
on you.
Please.
Oh, sorry, Justin. I was just gonna say, and speaking as a company that wants to buy clean energy, wants to buy it here, we're buying all over the world. We know we've been able to make a market, but we are thrilled to have a federal government that is pushing in the same direction. Before you got on, Madam Secretary, I was saying it's like wind in our sails. And so we want to be part of the fleet that's gonna help to help this green economy grow and these green jobs to grow across the country.
Yep, 1000%. I'm so glad to see you on.
Yeah, you too.
If I might add, so Lafarge Holcim has committed to building its first net zero plant by 2030. I hope more than one, but my job here is to convince them that the best place to do that is in the United States. And I think we've got a perfect location in Michigan, actually, where we currently have a plant, but to look to rebuild that into a net zero facility would be my dream at this point. And but it is a $1.5 billion investment to do so. So, how we look to finance that investment, we need to have the demand from our customers to have these low carbon products and policies in place that can help us move forward. So I guess needless to say, we're looking very closely at the Department of Energy investments and, what we'll see for carbon capture. And, one of our biggest issues is that we are in the process of building a field study for building a large scale carbon capture unit at our plant in Portland, Colorado, but it is a first of its kind. It will capture 2 million tons of CO2 per year. And it is a very large investment and it's a long road to get there. So, we need the support of government and we need the support of, investors to make sure that we are headed down the right path with this. And that also we can be assured that the policies that come into play will be there long term.
Well, can I just respond to this quickly? Because, the American Jobs Plan has got 10 CCUS demonstration components. You probably are aware of that. And 15 hydrogen demonstration projects, which we want to locate in areas that, that are most in need, where we can demonstrate to people that there are jobs for them. And so I say this to you all, because we're interested in both green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. We're obviously interested in decarbonizing the toughest to decarbonize sectors, which of course is, cement and steel, et cetera. That space is going to be directly addressed by the Loan Programs Office. So we've got, we've got billions and billions of loan guarantee dollars that we would love to be able to have a discussion with you about.
That sounds fantastic, and this is exactly a very, very good point, Secretary, because we are very optimistic about the electrification of many sectors, including what Barbara is saying about the entire fleet of mobility, so the
yes.
auto electric vehicles. But we need to accelerate the e-fuels or the green fuels as well through green hydrogen, and because this is, for the long term, it's absolutely needed. And the good thing about for example, offshore wind, not only offshore, but also onshore wind, but offshore wind, at night, the wind blows at least as much as at daytime, and we don't use as much energy. So that would be a fantastic opportunity to leverage those assets through electrolyzers to generate that power, because we need that at scale as well globally. We are engaged in more than half a dozen at scale projects in Europe, and we'd be more than happy to take you up on that and develop exciting projects.
That's very exciting. I've been talking with my counterparts, the Secretary of Energy versions of all of these countries. There's so many that are really counting on a green hydrogen shot, essentially something that will really help to deliver reliable baseload dispatchable power. And, obviously wind is a huge opportunity for that. So we should have a follow-up conversation. I'm just saying.
This is such an interesting conversation to have. I'm glad that it's happening here. I want to shift gears a little bit, just to follow up on something that Secretary Granholm said, and to sort of ask all of you about it, and which was something along the lines of, with your support, with regard to passing legislation and showing, getting bipartisan support, showing that the business community is interested in climate solutions. And so the question for all of you is, what's beyond a lot of the steps that you're making internally and together in this coalition, how do you show that support from the business community to Congress, to Washington, and how can you continue to advance that? And I think I'm going to start with Lisa, because I know you have to run. Also, Apple is biggest corporation in the world, so let's start there.
I will not leave a minute before the secretary does, but I appreciate you, Justin. Look, I think that all of us are about using our voices. When we join something like the Race to Zero, our long-standing partnership with We're Still In, and the RE100, you name it, that is business using its voice the best way it can to say, not that there's safety in numbers, but there's strength in numbers, that we have to be clear. And I want to say this with the secretary on the phone. Apple does not invest in clean energy out of some philanthropy or because it's a nice thing to do. We do it because it's good business. Clean energy is cheaper. Recycled materials, you mentioned rare earth metals. It would, touch my heart, but recycled rare earth metals are an opportunity for us in this country, but also a huge opportunity in lowering our footprint for our products. And we're determined to be carbon neutral by 2030. So I think businesses need to set aggressive goals. We need to be transparent and honest and audited in our accounting for those goals. We need to support the administration's policies where we agree with them and serve as examples that no one is asking us to do something that's not good for business. It's actually something that in the medium and sometimes even in the short term is extraordinarily good for our country and our country's competitiveness on the world stage and for jobs.
Yeah, and I give, if I may build on that as well, I think business needs to show leadership and have courage, both within our own operations, but also really to say, is our business model fundamentally sustainable for the long term? Are we doing something that either is fundamentally good or can become fundamentally good? And our company, as example, was something, our business model was not sustainable. So we needed to make radical choices to change that to the better. And I firmly believe that all companies need to do that, because not all business models are sustainable. On top of that, and I think this is one of the biggest roles we can all do, especially the larger companies, we need to both put pressure on, but also help our supply chain decarbonize. It's relatively easy to do so ourselves, to buy clean energy, to ensure that we take the necessary steps. But many of us have thousands of suppliers, and we cannot just put demands on them. We have to help our supply chains decarbonize as well. And then we need to be a voice in the public and inspire others. We, for example, just published the learnings from our transformation within less than a decade, and we're making that publicly available so even competitors can steal with pride. We need to show that openness and open source, and we need to work with our supply chains. Otherwise, we won't make it in time.
I fully agree, Mats, and if I can build on that, right? We own already 102 wind turbines, IKEA in the US. We own more than 240,000 solar panels, right? We did all these investments because part because of what Lisa said, but also because we believe that is the only way and it's the right thing to do. Then when we start changing our supply chain, it's when we start facing also some challenges, right? We started doing all deliveries with electric vehicles. We've started in New York and LA. And when we do that, we face some challenges, right? Suddenly, when today or before you could just do a delivery from A to B with one truck, today you need to stop to charge. We need this investment in infrastructure. We need this support. And there is where I think government and private sector needs to work together to accelerate these commitments, because I do believe big companies need to be led by the values and need to be committed to the goals that are established, right? And many, many more companies are setting these big goals. And I come back to the inspiration. I think we need to inspire many more, big and small, make it through regulation, but still sharing the good practices, because there are so many there that could accelerate just by closing the gap very, very quickly.
If I might add on, I fully agree with what colleagues here have said. But also, as leaders in our industries, we truly need to lead, right? And make bold moves. So just as an example of one of the things that we've done is we produce a low carbon product, but it's not demanded by the market. And they want to use the cements that they've used for long periods of time. But we made the bold decision in many of our markets to stop producing those older products and only produce the low carbon products. We're the leader in the market, so our customers don't have a choice, and they have to move in the direction that we move them. So I think it's kind of taking that leadership role and taking it to the next level and saying, we will not compromise. Although we understand this is what you want, we don't think you should compromise either, and you need to reduce your impact as well. So it's really making those bold moves.
Can I just put a capper on this question? I'm just inspired by all of you who are, you are visionaries and you are leading. And there's so many thousands of other businesses that can learn from your example. And there are a lot of, I would say, members of Congress that could learn from your words as well. And it's not to get political, but sometimes folks just need to hear that, investing in America, it's okay. It's a good thing. It'll help us. And so to the extent that any of you are in a position to lead. I mean, Jeff Bezos came out and supported full-throated the American Jobs Plan. It gives permission for others to do the same, and it gives permission. I mean, and some of you may have already, and I apologize if I don't know that, but to the extent you can, we'd be really grateful, because we feel like our hair is on fire. We have 942 days left without weekends of this administration in this first term that we know of. And this is an existential crisis. And so we need to get this biggest investment in America since World War II done in order to be able to start executing on getting this technology out. So we're really grateful for the partnerships that have already begun and the partnerships in the future. So thank you very much for allowing me to come on. I know I've got to jump. I think Lisa probably does. Maybe you're all done. I'm not sure. But I really appreciate this conversation. And I really am very grateful for your leadership on behalf of 330 million people who in this country expect us to lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining. I think I'm going to switch gears, and I want to go to some of the audience questions that we've gotten ahead of time, and I might add my own little spin on some of them. But there's one question about how do we persuade China to stop all investment in coal-fired power stations? And curious, feel free to respond to that directly, but I'm curious broadly. We've been talking about the US, obviously, for obvious reasons, but I just wonder, we have multinational firms here on the call. How do you think about these same questions we've been talking about in an international context? Yeah.
I think I'll use, Justin, I'll use the European offshore as an example, because exactly like some of you said, it is that I mean, renewable energy is cheaper now. I mean, offshore energy is cheaper than a new build fossil fuel fired energy. And the reduction in 8 years in European offshore wind has been 66% in less than a decade. So I don't think that the way forward to force somebody else would be to say, how can we stop you from doing things? It would rather be two things: to say, how can we inspire you towards a better way? And the second thing is, when we buy products, we're saying, if they are not made with less or no carbon, we don't want to buy your products. Those are the only two things that work. I don't think it's tariffs or anything else. It should really be through the commercial forces. So when Barbara or Javier are buying, or we are buying any products, we say, we want you to document their low carbon. And then, by the way, if you want to make it lower carbon, here are ways we can help you decarbonize how you're doing because we've done it before. So inspiration and demand to your supply chains, I believe, is the best way to do it.
I think Barbara is on mute.
But yeah.
Sorry, inspiration and the availability of key technologies. I mean, there are parts of the world that have limited or no access to electricity. And in some segments of the world, their only choice is coal today.
Exactly.
Right. So what we have to do is work together as people who are experts in these technologies to assure there is supply. What you'll hear us talk about at Siemens is globalization, because we're recognizing that, yes, we've been on a trend that the world globalizes. It leads us to this low cost behavior. But now let's think globalization. And I'm encouraged by some of the recent announcements that perhaps China will be on this journey with us and will be a key player. We have the technologies available. We need to get them deployed in an economically attractive way.
Just, I think from our side, we are, I think the easy answer here is we are committed to the planet, right? And not to a certain location specifically. And that's at least our view on IKEA. We operate more or less all over the globe. And that means that we have impact in many places across the planet. And I liked a lot this whole community, right? And being as global as needed, but as local as possible, right? It is extremely needed that we look at the local communities. What is the need in that location? Not necessarily where we are present, but through our foundation, we are trying to support all over the world in many, many places. Where people do not have access to the very basic things, right? So it goes really beyond the business, I believe, and it goes really, again, into this purpose-led company where you have strong visions that you need to fulfill. So for me, that's a very important one, committed to the planet, wherever we are and beyond, to make sure that people and communities have a better life today and especially tomorrow.
I guess to add on to that, very similarly, we are a global company. We are all committed to net zero, whether we're in the United States, Germany, or in China. So, we will do our work in China to influence what's happening there from a Lafarge Holcim perspective. But then, as we look at our different companies throughout the world, it's been mentioned many times, looking through our supply chain and simply making sure we're voting with our dollars, right? And buying from companies that have the same commitment that we have, and then using our influence within our local communities to also talk about those low carbon products and pushing through and pulling through lower carbon solutions.
So another audience question. Net zero by 2050 is a long dated target. How do we ensure more meaningful, the question is more meaningful, but interim targets that are easier to monitor and hold companies accountable to?
I think that's happening already, Justin. I honestly, I heard everybody on this call say, many of us have, we have 2025 targets, we have 2030 targets. We have set a target that all of our energy generation should be completely carbon neutral scope, so it's all full scope 1 and 2 by 2025. And we will be completely net zero 10 years ahead of plan by 2040, including our supply chain. And I know Siemens has the same thing. I know also from IKEA, where I sit in the climate leader CEO with the IKEA group CEO, and I know so the ambitions are also very tangible. So honestly, I think we are doing it, but we need more companies to do the same, including also the mid and smaller size companies. I don't think the challenge is the larger companies. I think we have it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so one of the things we've done at Siemens, and I'd encourage others to do the same, several of you have mentioned supply chain. With 24,000 suppliers across the US, what we've been doing is actually looking at equity and inclusion. Right now, a quarter of our suppliers are diverse, owned by diverse owners, and we're excited about that. But the other thing we're doing is actually applying what we're calling a green digital twin. our supply chain organization can actually give feedback to suppliers about how their offering stacks up against others in terms of its carbon footprint. Now, we're turning that same lens around and saying to customers, we can help you analyze your enterprise. So we have a way to take our own efforts now and influence others in our supply chain end to end. And that end-to-end discussion of how do we provide capabilities to decarbonize? How do we provide capabilities to build in renewable energy, convert to electric vehicles? Siemens is bringing products to the table for all of those aspects of these goals. So we'll see an ever ramping up performance across the whole ecosystem. But what's really exciting is we're working now with governments at all levels. I mean, we've heard from the federal government today, and we're also working with tribal, state, and local governments. The goals that they are setting are actually inspiring, and I think they're going to establish mile markers for us along the way that are going to keep the momentum rolling.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, so we have heard a lot about how to influence across the supply chain, with customers. Jamie referenced customers who have no choice but to buy the low carbon product. I'm curious, how do you influence others in your separate spaces, right? In your sectors, beyond across the supply chain, and how do you influence your competitors to push them, I won't say force, to push them to do the same? Because of course, having a leader in one segment is not the same as having the whole segment transition.
Yeah, because we're in this business, we actually are leaning forward, and now our competitors are also challenging us. Schneider doing great things, right? Honeywell, Johnson Controls, many others, ABB. Look around the world and you will see people in our space. Those involved in electrification, automation, and digitalization are all leaning forward. And one of the fun things are all the rankings. And so all of us going, ooh, where do we stand against peers? How about the rest of you guys?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say so. 2 years ago now, I put together a strategy for us where we would use sustainability as a competitive advantage, being first movers in the space and all of that. And I can say that it has really been a good thing for our business. And in the end, we hope and we know that our competitors will be fast followers. Right. So this was even before LafargeWilson put out their net zero commitment and all of that. I saw that we can use this to our advantage and say, we need to be first movers. We are doing this anyway. We need to talk about it, and we need to push our customers in this direction.
And you, Barbara, you said it. I mean, those rankings, they're not only fun, they're also good. Because I mean, when we were named last year the world's most sustainable company by Corporate Knights, there were a lot of people who were quite busy trying to do more of the same. And now we've been sort of named the world's most sustainable energy company 3 years in a row. This matters. So it helps a lot. But the other thing is to engage, to really have open source, to not keep it a competitive advantage, but to share. So I know all 4 companies on this call are openly sharing with competitors as well. And I'm really excited about many of the industry partnerships. So for example, there's among the global steel companies, there's something called the Steel Zero Alliance, where the sector is working together. And we the really interesting thing is we are not only somebody who can help through green power and green hydrogen to decarbonize the steel sector. We also buy millions of tons every year of steel through the wind turbines we buy. So this ecosystem approach that we can both help decarbonize production, but if we can also help for those companies to create a market for green steel, like you say, Jamie, you need somebody to help create a market for green cement. If we can engage in those ecosystems where we can help each other, I think we can truly accelerate those decarbonization journeys.
And I think this is the healthiest competition we can have in between all companies, right? Just sharing, just learning from each other, demonstrating actually many times that it can be done. Actually, it can be done, and it's not only good for the planet; it's also good for the business in many cases. For us at IKEA, we are so fortunate to be inside of many people's home, right? So we actually see this as a responsibility also to inspire people living more sustainable. And you will see in all our communication, if you go online, that will be part of how we also want to influence and inspire many more people to live healthier. Just to give you a fun fact, we incorporated now our plant bowl, right? And we are very famous for the meatballs. But the plant bowl has a 4% of the footprint than the meatball has, right? And for us, this is the first move, right, towards this. And sometimes it's also about, you know, again, I come back to the inspiration, because when you put your head into going from 0 to 100, it's such a stretch that it makes the whole thing extremely complex. But if we just ask and help people to understand what is the very one step that I can take here and now, then that's one step ahead, right? That we start tomorrow from. So that's extremely important for me, that it's also this big competition, but also, you know, nothing to be ashamed. Let's start now. What can I do here and now? So it's a very short step, but it's one step, right? And inspire many more people in doing this.
I think the most important role that visionary companies can take upon them is to be a catalyst for greater change. Because I mean, an example we all know is what Tesla has done for the electrification of vehicles. Tesla won't own the entire market for electric vehicles, but without Tesla, that transformation would have happened a lot slower for everybody else. We have, in all modesty, done the same in offshore wind. But if we can all do examples that are so visionary, that are so obviously right, that everybody else wants to copy them, it becomes a journey of accelerated change. And when our competitors, when they copy what we do, in our internal media, I typically say to our colleagues who are saying, well, as a commercial CEO, I hate it, but as a world citizen and leader, I absolutely love it, because we will accelerate the positive journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to come to another audience question, which is, what are the best ways to mitigate the environmental and human risks associated with the renewables supply chain? Mads, I think that would be a good one for you to take, and anyone else, of course, is free to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, it's no doubt that the renewables build out is something that the world needs, but it needs to be done in a responsible way. Because we don't have unlimited land, and if we don't do it in an environmental responsible way, we are not being responsible, right? So I mean, for those who have seen the Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix, seeing we're not treating our oceans well, and we are not treating our planet well. And it's not only about consumption; it's also about biodiversity. It's about essentially many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I think we need to accelerate the build out of renewable energy, and we need to do it fast. But that also means we need that everybody who's in this space needs to do it responsibly, by creating engagement with local communities, by creating local jobs, by taking co-accountability for educating the workforce, protecting biodiversity. I mean, we spent millions of dollars protecting one species of birds in one of the places where we did a wind farm in the UK, and we did it happily, because we need to take a full 360-degree responsibility for doing so. And we are doing the same thing in the US as we build that out.
Well, I want one more audience question, which is, how do we embed the value of nature into financial markets? And I think, you know, obviously, you know, this is not a panel on financial markets per se, but I'd be curious about how you're thinking about nature in your businesses and incorporating it, you know, along with climate specifically. And I don't want to. Yeah, Barbara, please.
Sure. Yeah, this is such an interesting question, because what this really touches on is the law of the commons. You know, this idea that we as people have been benefiting from an environment that we live in for so long. And it traditionally things that were free to everyone. And then people began to own land and own resources, et cetera. And so what is the value that you place on it? And I hadn't really thought much about it quite this way. I want to give this some deeper thought, but a related question I've been thinking about is, what's the cost of doing nothing?
Mm.
Right. So as we speak, you had asked earlier about how do we speak to our legislators? And this is one of the big questions I'm asking as we think about whether or not to make the investments in infrastructure. What's the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah.
And it turns out we will spend more money responding to crises, weather events, et cetera, if we are not active now. I love the idea of putting a value on nature because it goes a little bit into the idea of, quote, a carbon tax. What we're trying to do is create economic incentives to drive markets toward some state that we want. It's happened in Europe already with a carbon tax, or, with all of the, higher prices of electricity, you can, from fossil-based fuels, you can actually see this transition. There are natural economic forces driving people to renewables at a faster rate than maybe other parts of the world. It works. Setting up economic incentives really works. What is the value of nature? Fantastic question.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone want to pick up on that? I'm curious, are you grappling with that internally with, say an internal carbon price or or I should say an internal value of nature price? But anyone else have anything to add there? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, so I'll add, we are miners, right? So we are mining limestone out of the ground, also clays and that kind of thing. So I think that we truly understand the value of nature, and we've spent a lot of time and effort in our communities reinvesting, in biodiversity and making sure that we are taking care of, the local species of animal and such. So, but the other piece, and I mentioned it earlier, is we have a large part of our business that we call geocycle that is really about not mining out of the earth, right? We want to be a part of the circular economy, and we want to take waste and use it in our products. So that is a huge goal and an effort for us that I believe 100 million pounds of material globally that we plan to divert from landfills and not mine out of the ground. So, that is our commitment there in trying to keep what's in the earth and our natural resources in place.
It's a great example, Jamie. I think the way we look at it is that rather than converting everything into financial value, then we actually look at it. We have several metrics that are also vitally important, even though they cannot directly be converted into dollars or euros. So in our ESG reporting, which we spend millions of dollars getting sort of very firm and very solid, not just on emissions, but all kinds of both environmental, but also social dimensions. We also measure and reward management on that. So I think really the best way of doing it is also to ensure that there are non-financial measures in how management is rewarded, because that is a way indirectly to price the behavior of things that do not directly influence financials only. That said, I fully agree with Barbara that long-term, everything can be converted into financials, because inaction will ultimately mean that either our companies do not exist or they do not thrive. So we even from a financial perspective, long-term, it's the only right thing to do. But short-term, I believe the answer is to simply ensure that everybody at the top of any company has non-financial critical sort of biodiversity or environmental dimensions in their reward schemes as well.
I think it's a super interesting question, actually. And what is the value of nature? And something probably to reflect for hours. But personally, I don't think it can be valued in money, right? We're talking health, we're talking disasters, we're talking things that we start to see, right? That we have never seen before, especially when it comes to weather and what's going on in many places across the globe. So, yeah, of course, you can put a price tag of acting and reacting to these events, but I'm with this thought, Barbara. What is what is the price of not doing nothing, right? And it is so expensive, and it's not about money actually. That I think we all need to take responsibility. Wood for us is extremely important, and it's a source of nature, and that's why we are doing all the investments in forestry we are doing to protect forestry and protect our forest. And I think everyone needs to take responsibility because we all have an impact, and even every single individual, right? Every single individual at home. So this goes beyond companies. Companies have a super key role, not to argue at all. Governments, of course, but we got to this point after many years of wrong behaviors, and it will take some years to change this situation. I'm extremely still optimistic given the circumstances, having this conversation, seeing action and leadership from the US. So, but coming back to that question of the 2050, Justin, I think 2050 is far too long, and we need to put a stronger and more brave goals to make a movement quicker, actually.
And Justin, if you allow, I think 2 years back, the Danish government, and I know Denmark is just a rounding error in global emissions, almost as I think 0.1 of global emissions, but we are anyway 5 million people. The government said we have a 70% reduction by the year 2030. And what the government did was they asked 13 different sectors, each led by as a company CEO. I had the privilege to be one of them, to make a plan. They said, you can set your team, involve anybody you need to, from the government administration, from other businesses, and make a plan and tell us what you need legislative or policy-wise to make that happen. And in less than a year, plans were made. More than 400 specific policy proposals were made. And the sectors themselves actually committed themselves to plan, inspiring also, to your point, Javier, also citizens. So now there is actually an actionable short-term plan that has been mutually committing between government and business sectors led by CEOs. And I think, honestly, that model can be copied, if not worldwide, then at least in many parts of the world. It works, and it gives this standing shoulder to shoulder between lawmakers and business.
Well, ordinarily at the I ask questions to just the final minute, but this has been such a robust conversation with so much ground covered. I figured I would just ask each of you to just give 1 minute closing. What is something you want to leave the audience after this really robust and interesting discussion? And we'll start with Javier, just because you're in the top of my screen.
All right, that's good. No, super good conversation. Again, just to repeat, I'm super optimistic about what's happening and to gain the traction and movement that is required. 2050 is too far away. We need to be more aggressive and start moving things quicker and faster. This is a marathon that every day we waste starts to become closer to a sprint. And 3 things where I think we need to make and commitments together. But one, it's about renewable energy acceleration, and that includes, of course, electrification. Second, it's about circular economy. We didn't talk much about that, but especially and specifically in the US, I think there is so much to do in this field. And then the third one, it's around food and the impact in the planet, because there is a lot that we can address this in the very short term. And thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great. Barbara, do you?
Yes, thank you, Justin. And thanks for the chance to be part of this discussion. I've learned a lot, as well as really enjoyed contributing. And I've said it a little bit earlier, but let me come back to this. It's times of intense disruption that actually give us the opportunity to shape the future we want, when everything ungels and we question everything. And so this year has been a year of health crisis, economic crisis, societal crisis. And here we are with this brilliant moment to re-envision what this future that we're building looks like. And what you've heard from all of us today is a shared vision of a future that's more sustainable, a future that's more resilient, and one that's equitable. We have a chance to create jobs, bring people into the economy, and build this more beautiful world for our future. And as a grandmother, I can tell you, I'm doing this for my grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. Mads?
Yeah, absolutely. Also from my side, a huge thank you, and not only to the organizers and you, Justin, but also to my fellow panelists. Fantastic to be part of this. Now, 3 points. Most of what we need in terms of technologies are here. So fundamentally, it's about leadership, about courage of leadership, and about boldness of leadership, and about sort of untraditional thinking of working together in new ways, both between companies, but also between government and companies. And second point is related to the first. We as business leaders, we need to see ourselves as catalysts for acceleration of the green agenda. Catalysts for change. If we inspire the rest of the world so they feel compelled to follow our example, we will also be accelerating to a much greater change. And I'm convinced that is happening as we speak, but we should do it even more. And the final point is renewable energy, like Javier said, is at the cornerstone of what we do. Renewable energy, electrification, and it's not just a build out. I mean, with the example of offshore, it's also an opportunity for a new industrial revolution. We can create jobs, investments, sort of new life into communities that have not had a fantastic journey, and we should do it in a responsible way in terms of protecting and getting the environment to thrive. Those will be my key points to leave you with.
Great. And Jamie, last word.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today. I appreciate being on this panel with these great esteemed colleagues, as well as, just being here in general. So I guess what I'd like to say is, we are on board. I think from a business perspective, business is ready for climate policy, and not just that, even a price on carbon. But as we look at it, we need it to be effective, market-based, economy-wide, durable and responsive, and all of that. So I think we are ready. We're bold and ambitious, and our customers will follow us as well as our competition. So again, thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you to all of the panelists. Again, normally I would try to summarize some of the key points, but I just think it's been a fascinating discussion and too much ground to cover. But thank you to all the panelists and to the audience. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.